finally we're here. Huge smile on the face of the real panelists. It's not a coincidence that we have Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Latvia. We actually sat down like logically, you see? Amazing. We'll be speaking about new Nordics and speaking about how to cultivate through data startups, how to help the industry, the ecosystem, not only one country, but between the countries. But before we move into the questions, and if you will have any questions, just raise your hand. We'll try to keep some time to answer questions from the audience. Let's do a quick round of, not the intro, but for each panelist to give a shared, condensed thoughts of why is it crucial for you as a stakeholder opening up the data. Let's start with Katrina.
Do you want me to make a lecture of an hour?
No, just 2-3 sentences. Let's keep it very concise.
So we're at Migrevention, a digital health tech company, building a solution. We have done it for 3 years now. The first solution is on the market for about 2. And instantly we discovered that there's no data to use easily. We have to collect the data ourselves. Although in Estonia it's quite well. We have the X-road system, we have all the health data, most of the health data, at least 95-97% in the digital ecosystem. But it's still not possible to get it very easily. So that's why we have to do it. Because otherwise, we already have seen, and we have discussed it multiple times, that actually the healthcare and health ecosystem will not work anymore if we don't make these digital solutions, if we will not make the digital turn and take this data into use in health system.
Great. Jussi, what's your perspective?
Yeah, nice to be here, Emil. Yeah, I'm from Bayer, so global pharma R&D, and as what I'm doing recently, I've been doing a lot of work in we have an ecosystem project where we work with startups, health tech, data-driven companies, and basically they are struggling to get their hands on good quality data that they can test there and validate their business models. And what is kind of really obvious, and also from global perspective, that in the Nordic countries we have something better maybe than in many places, and basically how we see that we could really also not like the optimal case would be that we have actually data collected, so we call it like secondary use of health data. So we would have data collected which we could reuse to test our hypothesis. And of course, like, you can always collect data, which we call the primary use, basically, when you collect for a purpose, but it's usually very expensive. This is what pharma does. So I'm also expert. We work with the clinical trials. So we also actually give the companies access to our clinical trial data inside our ecosystem, so they can also learn how the data looks like that we collect.
Great. And what about Sweden? How happy hospitals or the ecosystem is about open data?
I mean, opening the data is essential for innovation. I'm working not directly with health data, but we are working with innovators, enabling them to drive this so needed innovation that is in the healthcare system with the digital arena. And that's extremely important, both because of the needs that we have been identified, especially with the COVID crisis, of modernization of the healthcare system to make it more better care, but also more cost efficiency to the patients.
Great.
And that will be only enabled if we have more accessibility to the data.
Just a question to you all, let's have a fire chat about this. When we speak about health data, we often think about genomics, clinical lab data, something hidden in the hospital archives or on the servers. What about the audience here? So I've seen, how many of you do have any wellness devices or Fitbits, Apple Watches, Oura Rings? Great. So what about this type of data? So the subjective, the noisy one. Most probably, oftenly, doctors are a little bit, resistant to use it. Do we speak about such type of data as well, if we speak about innovations?
I think we do. Depends if the healthcare system is ready for it. And I think when we ask the question from the audience also, we can ask about Apple Watches and Oura Rings, but we can also ask about medical grade solutions. if the data that the users collect is a medical grade data. And I think that fact applies to every data point, not only here in the room, the data that the users collect themselves, but the data that the specialists in the hospitals collect.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and we call it in pharma, we often call it digital biomarkers. So that's, of course, a really active research topic across the pharma to basically try to optimize the trials. So we would have something, let's say, a little bit easy to collect, easier endpoints in our trials. But of course, like I think the best case for all of this kind of nice data, big data that we collect is that you should somehow be able to connect that to which we call the clinical phenotype, meaning what actually the patient is. So the data itself is not so useful if you cannot connect that to the clinical phenotype, and this is something what we, at least in Finland, and I think other countries actively try to push, that you have that possibility to you have that connection as well.
And we're speaking a lot, about ecosystems, very high level, policy making and, making data available, et cetera. Did your job in particular, or your organization job, resulted in actually having more startups appearing? Or?
Supporting more startups that will be creating this change with and using the better data. So helping them to identify where they can find the data, what is the data that is available out there, how to access that, and also how to grow as a startup, having access to early capital and also skills and development. That's our main tasks. But now I think that is very important also, and this is something that we are doing in Sweden, how can we map and identify data, where it is, to make it more accessible.
Finland is known as one of the pioneers. Often in Latvia we speak not about Estonia, but Finland as the secondary health data use mecca, the place. How many of you actually are building anything related to wellness or are keen about wellness, health tech, biotech? Raise your hands. Anyone? There is 1, 2, 3. Oh, wow, there are more than 5 hands. That's amazing. Next year, let's make it 10 plus. Nevertheless, how can these keen guys, fly over to Helsinki, 50 minutes flight from here, and utilize the powerhouse that you develop in Finland?
Yeah, this is actually a really interesting question, because in terms of, let's say, what's the most sensitive data in the world? You could say it's the health data, basically. Okay, you can say defense or military could be quite sensitive, but health data is really sensitive. So we actually see an ecosystem across the Nordics, like new startups who actually specialize in facilitating the access to the data. So there's actually a real need. So we, as a pharma company, also use these companies. So we actually work with a startup in, like, one is called MedEngine, they work in Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and we work with them to create all the necessary documentation. So this is actually one interesting thing where you really need an ecosystem. So otherwise it's just too expensive yourself as a startup try to get the access. So you need to have like a lot of partners in the system. So I would say that if you need that, you should come to Finland and visit our we have health data hubs and discuss that topic and find your partner there, basically, who can help you.
So it's all about finding partners, and then switching to Katrina as a startup founder and CEO. So you're the first one in the Baltics, am I right, who received the certification for the digital?
I think you had one in Latvia before.
Okay, but nevertheless, you're one of the first. We're very proud of that with the startup of yours. But it means that you should have had access to data, am I right? What it meant to you as a startup? You have this own.
To kind of get the access to
data.
Yeah,
sure.
So you have quite many ways to do it, but in Estonia you build yourself in the healthcare ecosystem. So we are a healthcare provider in Estonia. But coming back to Jussi and FinData, I think the FinData system is great, and maybe to push it even forward from Estonia to Finland, it would be great to test for Estonian and other startups also in Finland. And actually, Finland has a great ecosystem in Helsinki and other regions also to support that. So to all the 5 startups in the room to know that. But from our side, building the solution, and as we decided to kind of collect the data ourselves, and now we have to, in the future, also share the secondary health data to others. And it's not only the Health Data Act that we have to keep in mind as a healthcare provider and a startup, but the other 13 documents that we know and don't know yet.
A lot of papers there. So we've touched base, on the good part, on the visionary and good part, but what are the obstacles? So it's, there should be something apart from, a pot of honey there. So what's that inside?
It is, and I can say from the Swedish perspective that the fragmentation of the data, fragmentation of the ownership of the data, and also the way that the nations are organized. In Sweden, for example, we have 21 regions, 209 municipalities, and each one of them have different skills and different systems, and it's very important for us to find a full understanding, a full mapping, and to be able to then create a system to support the accessibility of the data to the innovators. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, the fragmentation, the organization, and also the skills around working with data.
Jussi, you've opened the data for research for quite a while ago as a country, so you learned a lot, am I right? So can you share some of the insights of, so we're not hitting our heads in the countries here?
I think, so I think that there has been some challenges, definitely, and but like you said, we learned, and I think that it's interesting now to find out, that this is really necessary. Like we can go now later, maybe we go to this international collaboration, but like many things which like we have actually found out, and we are working also with US companies now, is that there's many really interesting startups coming from US which could be born also here. But the thing is that they actually have had the access for a longer time in the US. But now when we in Finland, we can open that, it looks like that we get more like deep tech startups, for example. And I think that's really promising to see that. Like we work with like creating more advanced anonymization strategies to be compliant with the GDPR, to be able to share the data with one company, startup Whale.ai in Finland, and so forth. So yeah, it's kind of promising, and we are going forward. And the nice thing is that there is also a nice industry perspective. So we have a governmental, let's say, is advocating that we have to be industry friendly when we create, let's say, implement the legislation now.
Great. So in Sweden, Alina, so you just told us, I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, about the Sweden Health Data Sweden.
Exactly.
The ecosystem. So do you have a landing page with applications? So how many, what is the interest? Is there any interest into that?
There is an interest, and there is a need, a clear need. The project is very new, so this is a 3-year project funded by the European Union. We are one of the European health digital innovation hubs. And right now we are setting up the services and the programs to support the startups in the ecosystem. But it's 3 months old. We are still organizing ourselves because what we find, and this is a national initiative, and what we found out within our consortium that has 18 partners, there is a lot to learn. There is a lot to learn, a lot to map, and this initial phase is based on that. But right now, if you look into the web, you can find the Health Data Sweden landing page. That's the starting point, and we'll be sharing more information about the supporting services that we are creating in there to the innovators, both to startups, SMEs, and to the public sector.
Great. Katrina, you mentioned that you were navigating throughout 13 documents, a pile of bureaucracy. So
it will be for all of us.
We call it the island, of fun in terms of bureaucracy. Nevertheless, what would be your suggestion to this 5+ hands? Let's make it 10. 10 hands of people in terms of collecting data. What would you do differently if you would to restart the startup?
That's a hard question. I will maybe answer the question that you asked before from them,
Yeah, sure.
and then ask the question from you, because I think it's very needed to kind of understand how it is in this secondary health data and opening up the secondary health data also in Estonia and Latvia. We have been wanting to do that, I think, for years now, and now I think the Ministry of Economic Affairs is doing the second round after the Health Data Act coming in. And I cannot remember the name of the project now, but we are now ready to kind of make the data available. And I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from our neighbors. But the clapping is on the right time.
We should learn from each other. That's
Yep.
true.
But how is it in Latvia? You're only asking, but you're not telling.
You asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. As I mentioned before, I think one of the smartest things we've talked in the roundtables was, hey, let's just have a translator and translate it from Finnish into Latvian and just take it from findata.fi thing about health data. Nevertheless, we're going there. I think one of the important things is how to... So everyone understands that health data is needed. It's not a topic for discussion. But the thing is how to monetize or utilize this, or whether we can put a price tag there, is of a question. And I will ask the reverse, the Uno card question to you guys, starting with Jussi, is that, if we perceive ad tech data, from advertising, there is a price tag. If you go to Google Ads, you can tell, hey, if I reach 1,000 people, I pay $10 a day, and I have my, huge banner with our photo from a panel discussion, making this advertisement. What about the healthcare data? Is there and can there be a price tag put? Because it will be very easy, am I right? You can just, multiply it by, 2 million, and then you have a ROI. How is it calculated?
Yeah. I think this is actually really a deep question. We could say that USA has been quite successful in monetizing the data, but their perspective and basically the whole philosophy of it is quite different. One thing is, of course, like if we put a pricey, like a really heavy price tag, like in the US it's done, it actually even makes it harder for the startups or new companies to access the data, because you can say it's $1 million thing to do that.
Sounds nice.
If we do it in Europe like a friendly way, it's only let's say the bureaucratic costs involved. And then we can boost our own economy by actually growing the companies. So maybe like if we don't apply, we could call it a license cost. So we out-license data. So if we do that, we may, of course you could make some kind of a compromise, but it's maybe hard to distinguish small companies from big ones, for example, in a legislation, But then we have examples like if you do really data collection like you do, I think that's something where we have an example in Israel, for example, where they monetize that you basically do a collection, which could be partly retrospective, but it means that they collect the informed consent from every party, and then there's a pricey, really heavy price tag, and this is licensed for you next few years, and then it's free for everybody. Meaning that you actually have a time-limited license. So that could be a way, but it's mostly for that you have to collect. Then we have actually in Finland also the biobanks, and in Estonia but they are, then it goes to more the biobanks. So I always there is really a huge need for having these kind of population data, meaning that you don't have to have a consent, and then you have to be really data privacy compliant. And then when you collect the consent, so the patient actually or the person signs that my data can be used, then it goes to the biobanks, and then you can have a price tag. I think you have to somehow make a difference, and this is why it's a little bit complicated, and this is why I think especially the small companies need some help and partners and ecosystems to support, that they know what they want to do actually.
So you're doing the right job, Aline, about that. But we quickly touched base the question of consent that Jussi told, and building trust with citizens. So I've seen many companies, doing, especially throughout the hurricane of ICOs, where they're saying, that you can monetize your own data and put a price tag on that. So this is something that is very challenging question. But to ask quickly an audience about sharing data, would you share the data with the life science companies or startups or the ecosystem? Yes? No? Just raise your hand if it's yes. So we see the handful of hands. Amazing. So we see it there. So the building trust with citizens, and actually Sweden and Finland and Estonia as well. I think you're working quite good with building such trust with citizens. We have this question open in Latvia as an example. Whether people would be so trustful with the government, with the life science companies, with the ecosystem as such, to share the data. What is the perspective in Sweden? How do you make it so trustful for the stakeholders?
I would say that we are still trying to overcome some challenges related to cybersecurity and the privacy. Mm-hmm. So there is still some concerns, and this is something that is a challenge in there, even though it was great to have this positive answer here from the audience, but making it clear that it's safe to share your own personal data and that it will be used for the greater good. That is something that will be benefiting not only yourself, but also as a society. That collective perspective is something that from the Swedish ecosystem is.
Well, traveling in Estonia, I've seen that in the drugstores you can get a polygenic screening test. So people are taking part in the biobank initiatives through the drugstore. So do they get anything, back as a personalized reporting? What's the success formula there that people are going in?
From the polygenic risk scores, it's saying it out. It's a great company called Antigenes, making tests for mainly breast cancer, but some others, and they have built up their solution based on Estonian biobank data and also UK biobank data. So that's one way of doing it and one way of using the data. I think the greatest thing maybe to bring out here is that we are on the way of building in the national consent service. So giving the consent that, okay, I am ready to share my data with, for example, Migrevention, mm-hmm. or maybe some other health tech startup. And that's something that maybe we are on the way of learning in Europe, but we have been doing that at least as long as I have been doing Migrevention, and it's still in the process.
Great stuff. Happy to hear that. Actually, one of our services that we started in Latvia is dynamic consent management, which actually gives a more proactive engagement. And really, I love Estonians because, as you heard, at least 3 brands like X-Road, Migrevention, Antigenes, Estonian Biobank. Really cool that we share the good examples. Before we switch to the cross-border collaboration part, do you have any questions here in the audience? Anyone? The ones who wanted to do startups in health tech space. Great opportunity to ask questions. No questions. Great. So nevertheless, let's switch to the second part. So I think each of panelists actually outlined that something great is happening in startups. There is an increase in startups, as well as life science companies' presence in their country. But what about the cross-border collaboration? Do we need to exchange the data between the countries in order not to foster population health or people traveling, but rather for the research, for the sake of utilizing the data and building innovations? What is your perspective on that?
I believe that it might be beneficial to do that, but before that we need to organize the data sharing within our countries, because it's quite, and this is an insight that we got from when we started working this national collaborative project with the Health Data Sweden. So, but in the process, meanwhile we are organizing, creating the infrastructure in our countries, it's very important to exchange best practices and keep the conversation open so we can exchange skills and best practices, but maybe we still need to to do some work before we talk about cross-border data exchange.
You touched base about Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, and one of the companies you're working on in terms of documentation, like 10 minutes ago. Would it be beneficial to to help with the diversity of clinical research and multicentricity if Estonia, Latvia would, walk hand in hand in sharing data with Finland, as an example? What would it bring to us?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't forget that the healthcare systems differ, the populations differ, and there's like in principle, like with the current systems, if you want to get a market approval, let's say like with the previous panel, with a new drug, you usually need to have these trials in many countries. So it's not really like it can be. In our company, we also like there can be more than 50 countries in one trial. So like if we really want to facilitate and improve, let's say cut cost, make faster, to have new treatments to patients, we really need to collect data from all the countries, preferably all the countries where we do trials. And then basically you get more trust from our regulators like the FDA and the European EMA, that this is actually something that you can also use to facilitate, which you could say from business perspective, in any kind of a healthcare related topic, you could say that if you have a new great treatment to patients which actually improves their life and increases life expectancy, that's the billion dollar kind of a business basically for you. And unluckily in Europe we haven't been really good in producing these new molecules. Most of them come from the US actually, and you could say that there is correlation to data access at least. I don't claim it's causality here, but it's really so. And we are going to, I have to also mention that we are going in really to the precision medicine sector now. And what precision medicine means, we have to basically chop to parts the current big disease groups that we have. And for that you need a lot of data, and you need to have high quality data. And let's if we combine the Nordic countries together and Baltic as well, we get like 30 million patient lives basically, or something like that. And that's a good amount. But if we only use 5 million, like in Finland, there's like for this kind of a precision medicine and rare disease research, usually we don't get enough patients to really validate what we want to do. So we really need to collaborate, we need to create those networks, and of course there is the European Health Data Space initiative ongoing, for example.
We'll talk about that in the next question, but beforehand, so Jussi just mentioned that we need, as a pharma company, they need to gather, in an idealistic situation, gather data from, and utilize data from all of the countries worldwide to make it affordable, good, precise, and also reduce the pharmacovigilance risks as well. What it means for startups? Do you need to travel the world with your app and collect the data? How does it work?
I don't think that we have to travel the world, and I think that I totally agree with you, both on biotech side, but also on software-based medical devices side, because you cannot do the trial only in one base and then say that it works here, but you have to do it cross-border. And Estonia, is really small. We call it a nice little country. It's not a market, and we don't have a lot of data points. But I think having the data points itself, maybe few or a lot, I think more important is the fact what we collect and how we collect the data points, and how we unify the data that we collect. Because if we collect one thing in Latvia, one thing in Estonia, and something totally different format in Sweden and Finland, we may have the same data points per se, but we cannot use them for the same research.
I maybe have to mention that we actually work with one startup who wants to do this harmonized data curation from hospitals. As an anecdote, I could say that probably many don't know that we actually, when hospital produces data, they actually have 50,000 tables of data where they have to somebody, a data engineer, has to find those all the different, and usually it's, you know, the same variable can be in 1,000 different tables or something. So it's not an easy thing actually to harmonize the data curation step.
Sounds like a lot of fun, huh?
That's not fun.
Come on, it's kind of fun sometimes, at least. But nevertheless, speaking of the license companies, quite a lot of times, especially in Latvia, we can hear, you know, not the stigma or stereotype that sharing data with the industry is, you know, an orthodox thing to do. Why? What fruits can it bring when, you know, life science companies collaborate with the healthcare sector? So, as from perspective of Finland.
Yeah. So we basically found out, we are working in our project with one of the biggest healthcare providers in Finland, Helsinki University Hospital, also with one of the leading AI universities, Aalto University, and us, a big pharma. And what we learned is that it's really good way to do it. So we can actually create things which benefit everybody in the process. And I think this is kind of coming from the side that pharma companies are really knowledgeable actually about data and data management and how to create the top quality data. You could say in the health data spectrum, the clinical trials are the kind of the top golden standard, that you cannot have higher quality than the clinical trials because it's so regulated and so much, they kind of audit the company. So the FDA can come and see how we actually, do we have the data, all the steps documented, how we do it and so forth. Mm-hmm. So anyway, like I think it's a win-win situation. And if we can create this kind of ecosystems around Nordics and Baltics, where I'm sure that the pharma companies will be really interested to join if we are open. And I think it's opening up. Like many, I think before it was a lot that there was suspicious thinking about like evil pharma and so forth. But I think I heard many times during our now 3 years we've been in the project that, yeah, we are so surprised how scientific you actually are, and you actually really want to treat the patients as best as they can be treated. And this is the reality now. Like, you know, the medicine is hard, or creating new medicines is really hard now because there's so high standards from the regulators. Like, it's not enough that it's better, it creates something, like it improves something, it actually has to also be cost effective. So the evaluations are really strict, and it's kind of when we do our design and hypothesis, we have to really understand how the patients are treated, basically.
There is a regulation coming in several years, 2027, I might assume, or maybe a little bit later, which Jussi mentioned, the EHDS, European Health Data Space, or the GDPR of medical world, as we might call it, you know, in an ecosystem. What do you think of that, Helene? Would it be something limiting or vice versa, enabling?
I do think that it would be something that might help to enable more standardization or create a better structure. But before it happens, I think that we need to focus on exchanging more best practices between the countries, between the different digital innovation hubs, and so. Yeah.
We were talking with Jussi about Alex from Insilico yesterday. So he had a documentary at BBC talking that classical pharma is shifting now because AI for drug discovery is there. So countries, even without, you know, big legacy of pharma, can become a pharma powerhouse because they're opening data, sharing data, utilizing it in partnership with other countries, and developing new drugs. You have your entities in the US, worldwide, but US is a big powerhouse. How do you see this? Whether we're once again blocking everything, like, you know, disabling the OpenAI and ChatGPTs, or is it the thing that, you know, will make a X-road to all of the countries?
I have to say, like, you are correct that the US is ahead of us in many ways, and I think that's really, I think something we should be afraid of, because it not only actually makes our chances worse for the startups in health tech, med tech to be like a new unicorns, but it also slows down how we get the new treatments to ourselves in the Europe. And basically the EHDS, so the European Health Data Space, could be the cure. But there's a little bit worrying signals, like we actually talk about, like what we discussed, it's a little bit what we already discussed, that the big countries are not maybe so eager to share the data as we want. So there's a comments that we would limit the data only to certain data modalities, so actually we couldn't use genomic data, which would be highly important actually for the future. Like in Finland, we have the FinGen with 500,000 patients now genotype, and we have basically, if the EHDS would come there, we could claim that can we even use that anymore for research purposes. Then there's a lot of, like we have in Finland with the legislation now that you can opt out, meaning that like you don't have to collect consent from everybody for this research purpose topic. But now there's also signals that the big countries in Europe want to create an opt-in, and we know already from biobanking that it will be extremely difficult to collect like high percentage of like consents from the population. And this is really against the idea of precision medicine, because you can do a biobank collection if you know exactly what you are collecting, and then it costs you have to pay per patient basically. But if you want to characterize a bigger pool, to be able to find that really beneficial group for your product, then you cannot collect the data from everybody and for that purposes, because it's just too much effort. So there is it's a promising if this can be done in a way. I would hope that they would use the Finnish secondary use of health data as kind of the starting point. But I don't think it's really obvious yet will it be. And also, the timing, nobody knows really how many years it will take. So
we're looking forward to it. So let's finish the panel discussion, by putting the blanket on smaller countries, because Jussi mentioned that bigger countries are not willing to share the data so much. What can we do as Estonians and Latvians to build a rocket ship in terms of utilizing health data? What are your thoughts on that, Katrina?
Cross-border collaboration to
Latvia, Estonia, friendship forever?
Friendship forever. To say it in few words, we just discovered a little over a year ago that Estonia never has had a traditional pharmaceutical industry. We just never had such a small country. But now, a little over a year, we have been building up this digital therapeutics industry in Estonia, together with Migrevention and other 5 companies. So just to mention, as Emil loved this, so we're not the only one.
Great. So we are out of time. We can run a lot of research during tonight's parties, especially the Estonian jokes about Latvians having 6 toes. We can do some DNA test or whatever. Thank you so much for the panelists. Let's give a round of applause from those who survived. Yes, great. But before you go home, don't go home first and foremost. There is sun a minute ago, Latvian weather. We have a series of side events tonight. First and foremost, Women in Tech, 6 p.m. at LIA office. Just Google it, LIA office, not so far away from here. Second of all, after party by Deal here at Hansa's Perons, happening and starting at 9 p.m. And if you haven't checked the lsm.lv or Delphi or any other news portals, there will be a largest epic drone show happening tonight at 9:30 p.m. As Madara wrote me, also just around the corner, Hansa's Perons. See you around. Thanks a lot. Enjoy the evening and see you tomorrow at Tactile. Perfect.